So in an effort to implement this vision, one of the first things that we have to do is talk a little bit about how we're supporting our students and how we're identifying those students who need our support. And so a couple things happened last year that sort of spurred this on. First, we took a road trip to Virginia Beach, where we learned a lot about how other districts are supporting schools based on the needs of those schools, specific needs that each school requires in order to move their students forward. So we did that, and then later in the spring, two folks in my office attended the American Educational Research Association conference, and they came back with an interesting concept that really worked well with our efforts to promote the achievement of all students. So if we think about the way we look at data, look at students and data, what we find is that we put them in buckets, right? We put them in an ethnicity bucket or a gender bucket or some other kind of bucket that says this is this kind of student, and then we compare them based on what bucket they're in. So we might look at the kids who are in the poverty bucket and say, these kids don't do as well as kids who are not in the poverty bucket, right? But what happens there is that you have to realize that no student is defined by a single bucket. And so when you put a student in a bucket like that and disaggregate data by these single factors, then what you find is that you are perpetuating stereotypes and biases that may already exist and may just get worse as a result of that disaggregation. And this is the way, by the way, that the federal government and the state government looks at data. They take kids and divide them into these buckets. But it's not as meaningful because everybody is multiple things. We all fall into more than one of those buckets, many of those buckets. And what we're seeing in our district is that diversity is increasing, right? So we have racial, cultural differences. More than 25 languages are being spoken at our schools right now. We have people that are very rich all the way down to people who are very, very poor. We have kids who have stable homes, kids who move around, and kids who are homeless and have no home at all. So you can see there's a lot of diversity in our district at this point. So we have to determine the needs of kids based on how those different factors affect each one of them. So for example, this kid on the left who's learning disabled, is a student in poverty, and is migrant, probably has dramatically different needs than this kid on the right? And it's not because of any one thing in these buckets, it's because of a combination of those things. So at the annual nerd convention in New York this last year, Elena Rickenbacker went to the presentation by this gentleman here, David Stevens, out of Berkeley Unified School District in California. And what they were looking for and what he developed was a way to sort of proactively identify kids who might be in need of support. Okay, because in the past, we would go back and we would screen kids, and then the intervention process is very reactive, right? You've had some things that cause you to not be successful, so now we're going to go back and intervene. When in fact you need things a little bit earlier. And so what he came up with was this idea that students are faced with two sorts of forces in their educational life. Some of them are headwinds that are challenges to that kid's success academically, and some of them are tailwinds which push them along. So, for example, examples of headwinds might be language proficiency, poverty, transiency, or disability. Those are things that are standing in the way of success for that student. Tailwinds, on the other hand, might be stable home, educated parents, money, or the ability to speak the native language, right? All those things help push a kid along. So if we take a look at this academic support index is what he calls it. What you have here, this is an example, a kid who has enrolled in a school middle of the year, okay? We classify that as a 1 value on a headwind. The attendance rate, they had both strains of flu last year, so they missed 2-3 weeks of school. That lowered their attendance rate to a point where that rated a 2 as a headwind. The kid has a learning disability, okay? And they have some historical low performance in their academics, which gave them a total headwind of 6, okay? So we sum up all those things. So what does that mean? Well, this academic support index, or ASI, is simply mathematically the sum of the headwinds that a kid faces. So all of those things that are standing in the way, that if you add up all those things, that gives you this value. But philosophically, what we're talking about here is a measure of the amount of support a student's going to need to be successful, right? And also, even more importantly, a measure of our obligation as educators to provide that support. So very often these headwinds are outside of our control, but we can provide additional tailwinds to overcome some of those headwinds, right? So we went back. We didn't want to just take this guy at his word. So we went back and said, okay, let's look at all the factors that we've looked at over time about what makes kids successful or not successful in our district, and let's calculate these headwinds and tailwinds for our district historically. So we looked at 3 years of students who have been in our graduation rate cohort, so kids that should have graduated, whether they did or didn't. This is how our district historically looks. So this is the academic support index down here at the bottom. Make it go away. Awesome. All right, so this is the academic support index down here at the bottom. Low means 0 headwinds, meaning nothing standing in your way. And high means you got a lot of things stacked against you. So if you look at this, it should be no surprise that given our community at this point in time, the vast majority of our kids are relatively low need students with regard to the scale. But we have this tail of kids down here that have a good amount of need, right? So what does that mean for achievement? Well, we looked at SC Ready scores for kids historically by headwind and by headwind count. So again, this down here is that ASI, those headwinds, and this is the scale score on SC Ready for ELA. So we're looking here at this middle line, which is, what did I do? Oh, thank you. Y'all are so good to me. Sorry, it was a headwind. Okay. All right, is that better? Okay, thank you. So we're looking at the middle line, which is the median value. Okay, so just don't focus on the pretty colors. Just focus on this middle line and look at how, as headwinds go up, what happens to that scale score. Okay, so it drops dramatically. Now let's look at math. Same thing. Okay, let's look at GPA. So the median is the line and the average is the little diamond. Look what happens. And just so you know, this represents like 2 kids, and these kids are autistic. So they're kind of an outlier, but you can see the trend is pretty dramatic, right? So if you have 0 headwinds, the median value for your GPA is 4.0. All right? If you have 1, it's about 3.6. But if you have 6, you're at 2.5. Okay? So what does that mean for graduation rate? So we ran a little test to see what's the probability based on headwinds that you're going to graduate on time in 4 years, all right? Well, if you're 0, 1, or 2, low need, you have anywhere between a 92 and a 98% chance of graduating on time. But if you're a high need student, which we have quite a few of, you have anywhere between a 48% and a 64% chance of graduating on time. And then an urgent need, forget about it, right? 3.5 to 32%, okay? All that is assuming that nothing else changes, right? So our quest really is to determine who are those kids that have needs, and by extension, what are the needs of the schools and how do they differ, okay? So this is part of a larger plan that we have to provide supports to schools. So this summer we have met with every principal at every school, and as a result of that meeting, we developed a customized team for each school based on what the principal perceives as their needs for this coming year, okay? And then each school is going to get a minimum of 2 meetings per year, one in the fall and one in the spring. At these meetings, they are going to present to us their progress, their needs, their plans, and goals for the future. Based on what they present and the team that's there, we can then customize our supports at the district to match their needs and goals. So every team will get a meeting or every school will get a meeting in the fall, and every school will get a meeting in the spring. And then in the wintertime, those schools that have high average academic support indices will get an additional meeting. Also, schools that have brand new principals will also get another support meeting so that we can make sure that they're getting the things that they need to be successful now and moving forward. So that is our plan for addressing school needs and customizing those needs to, or those supports to their needs. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Well, I'd like to say that is the #1 strategy that goes across all our performance goals. 2 years ago, we changed the name of this place to Central Services. This is a great example of that. We're going to go out and serve our students, serve our schools, and find out what their needs are, and assist our schools into talking about individual children. Remember what we said, we're not going to judge our success on aggregates and averages. We're going to judge our success on individual kids. This is a great example of that, because we were looking at data today. We had pulled up kids who were behind, that were sophomores, and we had their individual names, and we're going to get down to that level of detail. What are we doing with these 42 kids? Who are they, and what's happening with them? Because that's how we're going to get to a 95% graduation rate, and that's how we're going to get to making sure they're prepared for their next steps on their journey.
Questions?
No, but I think it sounds like a great plan, because that has been the criticism, is that the people at the then district office didn't know what the schools really needed. I mean, that was for a long time, and I think you're really meeting the needs of those schools now and the kids. I love it. Great idea.